Evidence number 6. Evidence number 6. Manuscript evidence. Manuscript evidence. Well, Mormons and Muslims like to say that the Bible cannot be trusted today because the text of the Bible has not been accurately transmitted down through the centuries. And that's what they have to do. In order to get you to buy into new revelation, like the Book of Mormon that wasn't published till 1830, they have to cast doubt upon previous revelation. They say, well, the Bible used to be trustworthy, but, it's been changed so much and all of that, we really can't trust it today. Well, Muslims do the same thing because they want you to get a copy of the Quran that came along 600 years after the Bible was completed. But to get you to abandon the Bible, they have to cast doubt upon it. And so these two groups are fond of saying these kinds of things. But the manuscript evidence actually proves otherwise. What is a manuscript? Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls would qualify. We already mentioned those. But a manuscript is any surviving handwritten copy of an ancient document that predates the invention of the printing press in 1455. Up until 1455, the Bible had to be and was carefully translated and transmitted by Christian monks and Jewish scribes. And they took very good care of the scriptures, and many of their handwritten manuscript copies of the Bible survive today. In fact, today there survives some 24,000 partial and complete ancient handwritten manuscript copies just of the New Testament, not to mention hundreds of surviving copies of the Old Testament. These manuscript copies of the Bible have allowed biblical scholars and textual critics to go back and verify that the Bible we have today is the same Bible that the early church had 2,000 years ago. I've seen these manuscripts with my own eyes. They're on display today in public places. Wouldn't you know it? The British Museum houses some of them. Oxford University houses some of them. The Israel Museum in Jerusalem houses some of them. They're on display. If you know Greek or Hebrew, you can go and look at these ancient manuscripts. Now, even if we did not have any manuscript copies of the Bible, there's another way of verifying that the Bible has not undergone corruption, and that is by examining the writings of the church fathers. The church fathers. Now, by church fathers, what are we talking about? Well, I'm referring to those leaders in the church of the first 3 centuries AD, following the original disciples. Men like Justin Martyr, Tertullian, Eusebius, Polycarp, these would be a few examples. These men and others, in their commentaries that they wrote on the Bible, in their correspondence with one another, and in their letters to different churches, preserved the Bible for us. How so? By quoting what the Bible said. In fact, they quoted the New Testament alone more than 86,000 times. There's a number to jot down. The church fathers quoted the New Testament more than 86,000 times. Why is this amazing? Why is this significant? Because their writings survive to this day. You can go to Amazon.com tonight and buy an encyclopedic-sized set that contains all of the writings of the church fathers, 38 volumes, and see with your own eyes their numerous quotations of both the Old and the New Testament. In fact, there are enough quotations from the early church fathers that even if we did not have a single manuscript copy of the Bible, scholars could still reconstruct 99.86% of the New Testament we have today just from their writings. Isaiah the prophet, inspired by the Holy Spirit, gave us this assurance 2,500 years ago. The grass withers, the flower fades. Those things undergo change and corruption. They're subject to the second law of thermodynamics, but the word of our God is not. It stands forever. God's given us that promise, and Jesus backed it up. In Matthew chapter 24, verse 35, he said something very similar. He said, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. Try as you might, by any means possible, to do away with my word. It will not happen. Jesus has given us that guarantee. He will watch over, he'll faithfully preserve his word so that every generation can know that it's trustworthy. So, back to our Mormon friends. Here is the question I encourage you to ask the Mormons on your doorstep when they tell you that the Bible has undergone corruption. I encourage you to put the burden of proof back on them. Before you get all, flustered, you put the burden of proof back on them. They're the ones that say, well, we can't really trust the Bible today. That's a claim. They're making a truth claim. So you put the burden of proof right back upon them. How do you do that? Well, it's as simple as asking this question. What evidence do you have? Okay, most Christians go into defensive mode. They're like, no, it is trustworthy. No, it hasn't undergone change. And then they're like, oh, what did Charlie say? Oh, gosh, it was like a year ago. Faces, F-A-C-E-S. No, it's not in that one. Oh, it must have been the M. What was the M? Oh, the manuscript evidence. See, that's the wrong way to do it, guys. You're making it much more difficult. You put the burden of proof right back on them first. You say, well, what evidence do you have? This is the look you'll get when you ask that question. I've seen it lots of times. Here it is, right here. It's usually a nice, long, blank stare. You know why? Because they, first off, never have been asked that question, so it's like stopping a deer in the headlights. And then they realize that they don't have any evidence. I've never had a Mormon be able to respond to that question by saying, well, actually, let me give you a little lecture here. No, they always say, well, that's a good question. We were taught to tell you that, back in our training school, but, Now, when I give you these kind of witnessing tips, you got to ask these questions in love. You don't say, well, what evidence do you have that that's the case? Mormons are commonly mistreated on the doorstep. Do you realize that? They're persecuted for their faith, and we want to love them. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15 says that we're to do all of this with gentleness and respect. All right, let's bring one more evidence to the witness stand here, and I'll wrap it up.